Thanks, Rachel. Welcome everybody to this morning's webinar, How to Thrive in a Post-Cookie Era. It's good to see you all. For those of you that have any questions as we progress through the webinar, please feel free to pop those in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. For those that I haven't met you before, for those of you that I haven't met before, my name is Jill Stewart and I'm the CEO for the IAB New Zealand. A very warm welcome to Peter Day. Peter is the Chief Technology Officer for Quantcast and he's our keynote speaker this morning. He joins us from San Francisco. And also a very warm welcome to our panellists, Alicia Delaney, who's the Managing Partner at MBM, Fabian Go, Product Director at Stuff, and also Rachel Bayfield, the Head of Analytics in New Zealand. Rachel is also our panel moderator this morning and part of the recently established IAB New Zealand Standards and Measurement Council, who are delivering this event to everybody this morning. Peter, welcome again and thanks for joining us this morning. As Chief Technology Officer at Quantcast, Peter is responsible for the development of products which allow marketers and publishers to make smart choices as they buy and sell effective targeted advertising. Prior to joining Quantcast, Peter spent 12 years working in the financial markets in a variety of roles in the quantitative finance sphere, including low latency pricing and portfolio analytics, which led to a role at UBS where he was responsible for equity derivatives, risk and pricing technology globally. Peter has a PhD in machine learning and had a brief career in academia. But before I hand over to Peter, a brief shout out to Brendan Mueller and the team at Quantcast for making this event possible, and also again the Standards and Measurement Council for delivering this event. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much. I trust you can hear me okay. I'll look for one of the other panelists to nod and tell me they can hear me okay. Yes, good, excellent. I've got 25 minutes today to try and explain a fairly complicated topic. So we're going to go straight into things. First and foremost, I want to get right back to basics. And the reason I want to get right back to basics is because often when we talk about ad tech and technology and marketing and things, we can spend an awful lot of time in the weeds and we forget the basics. And when I talk about the basics, I really mean the basics. This is the ad-funded content economic model. This beautiful economic model that has existed for many decades now, which has allowed a whole content economy to thrive. That is, we've got consumers who effectively exchange attention for high quality content, and we've got publishers who are creating that content and exchanging a share of that attention for cash. I often think this is what we forget when we think about all these complexities when it comes to kind of ad tech and martech and activation online and things. Fundamentally, everything we do is about this economic system. And changes that we make to this economic system have radical impacts on behaviors. But if you look at this economic system, the reason it works incredibly well is because you've got three different main participants and their goals are not in direct competition. And therefore, kind of prosperity can emerge. So you've got consumers of content, which in the digital space are people like web users. They really just want low friction access to quality content. And if you had to reduce all of their decision making to one kind of measure, they're really trying to maximize their content to annoyance ratio. Anything that annoys them will put them off. That's too many annoying ads, that's login walls, that's paying for things. And they want really high quality content for as little annoyance as possible. You've got publisher, and publishers' goals are to fund future content production. And their measurement increasingly now, when I spend time with our publisher customers, they talk to me a lot about maximizing their sustainable profits, making sure that they're still going to be here in 2 years' time. And this is a big challenge for publishers globally at the moment. And of course, we've got marketers who are pushing cash into this ecosystem. Their goal is to reach and influence audiences, and their measure, if they can measure it, is maximizing that kind of return on investment that they're kind of making. Now, there's this great quote that I found when I was doing research for this talk, which was economic systems, their rules of engagement and the resulting flow of capital shape participants' behavior and have dramatic impact on the activity they support. The economic system of the ad-funded open internet has undergone many shifts in the few decades it has existed and will need to continue to evolve to survive. Turns out I said that. I don't remember saying it, but I've been quoted as saying that, and I still agree with myself 2 years on. What I mean by this is in this economic model, particularly when it comes to things like open web advertising, we've already seen some of the rules of engagement and valuation of attention change, and it's had dramatic consequences. We used to value clicks very, very heavily around the world. So we valued this attention over here. Marketers valued this attention they're getting based on clicks. And unfortunately, that led to lots of clickbait and these horrible websites which will kind of trick you into clicking on ads, and ultimately led to things like bots, you know, these automated things that would go and click on ads automatically, right? So the incentives that we set in economic systems are absolutely critical for changing participants' behavior. Equally, we then moved away from clicks into kind of things like view through conversions, and then we cared a lot about viewability. And we set some slightly odd incentives when it came to viewability, like you know, we want 80% viewability goals across the board, meaning 80% of all our ads need to be viewed. And that meant that publishers were doing odd things like shoving all the ads at the top of the page, not in the content where they can be more engaging. And it meant that they would have ads load later because they didn't want to have low viewability scores and things. So it's really important to remember when we start thinking about everything we do from an ad placement perspective, we're really trying to make this economic system as effective for all of the participants as possible. I think everyone would agree that a great economic system here would be where marketers actually pay more for really valuable impressions. They're able to value attention. They're able to leverage that attention, so ultimately there can be lower ad density and a low friction access to quality content for end web consumers. So I started there because I think we often forget that perspective when we get right into the weeds of measurement and attribution and cookies and all this other kind of stuff. And I always like to frame things going back to those basics because it's not spoken about enough. So we're now going to go right to the other end of the spectrum and right into the weeds of it. And we're talking about what is a cookie. There's a lot of confusion about what cookies are. People think cookies are things that track them around the internet, and they're all sorts of different things. Cookies are actually really, really simple. Cookies are a very, very simple mechanism that, that relate to how browsers talk to kind of web servers. So if I've got the New York Times here, most people are aware that the New York Times, it will connect to a newyorktimes.com web server when I type in this kind of web address. The first thing it does is it goes and loads this code here, this HTML, which these days are riddled with these kind of div things all over the place. It loads this code, and then there's a lot of back and forth as it kind of goes and fetches an image over here and a video over there. And so it's this constant kind of chatter between your web browser and a newyorktimes.com web server to create this beautifully immersive experience that is in newyorktimes.com. As part of that kind of value exchange, what happens is as your browser is making requests to newyorktimes.com, it goes and requests content, and it is going to send what it's called a cookie over to newyorktimes.com on every request. And that means the newyorktimes.com says, look, I've already set a little cookie. It's my cookie, as in it belongs to newyorktimes.com. And a cookie is simply a key and a value pair. That means it's something that has a name, such as ID, and a value. This is one cookie. This is owned by newyorktimes.com, which means every request to newyorktimes.com is enriched with ID, a cookie called ID and a value ABC123. The mechanism that makes all of this possible is as newyorktimes.com responds to that request, it will send some content, it might send some text, it might send an image. It can also tell the browser to set a new cookie. And this time it's saying, hey, set the newyorktimes.com cookie, session ID equals ABC123456. So I've got that now stored in what's called my cookie storage. Every subsequent request to newyorktimes.com will be enriched with both of these attributes, and so on and so forth. That's all a cookie is. An individual cookie is one of these lines. The three most important attributes are the domain it belongs to, which means anytime I connect to that server, send this cookie, the name of the actual variable, such as ID or session ID, and the actual value associated with it. That is all a cookie is. It is nothing more complicated than that. And these are phenomenally useful things because it's these that enable, say, your browser to remember your shopping cart. So if I accidentally close my web browser and I go back to the site, it remembers that I've put a can of beans or something in my shopping cart and I don't have to go and add it again. And it remembers my login information. So it really helps kind of user experience. If you ever want to kind of really get into the weeds and you have a web browser, you can look at these yourself. If I go to, let's say, Forbes.com here, if you want to see a cookie in real life, all browsers have what they call developer tools. And you'll be able to find, he says, if I remember where, under here, a little section called cookies. And you see in real life, there's lots and lots of these different things. So from Forbes.com, you can see lots and lots of different cookies. You can say, this is the domain. So every request from this web page to anything with .google.com, it's going to send this set of cookies here. And there's a whole bunch of Forbes.com ones, and they're pretty unintelligible generally. They tend to be these codes that computers think in terms of, these kind of identifiers and things, rather than anything that's particularly intelligible. But you can see on a single web page, or we've probably got a bunch of R's in here too. You've got this little MC cookie here. This is our kind of identifier, which gets sent every time a request is made from this web page to quantserve.com. You can kind of see these here. So these are not magical things. They're not particularly clever things, but there's a hell of a lot of them today. Now, where were we? Right, so that's all a cookie is, a simple kind of name and a value, and it's associated with some sort of domain. Now, a third-party cookie is exactly the same, only the domain that owns it differs from what's in the web browser. So as I go to BuzzFeed.com or Forbes.com or NewYorkTimes.com, it's effectively the cookies that are owned by other domains. So in this case, as I collected to BuzzFeed.com, it might have cookies being set by us or by Google or by analytics.com and exchange.com and adserver.com and so on and so forth. They're allowed to get and set their own IDs. The difference between a first and third party cookie is simply, is the person setting it and getting it on their request the same as the name that's in your web browser? Which domain owns it, right? There's nothing more complicated to it than that. People will try and tell you it's more complicated than that, but it's really not. But these third-party cookies have been super useful because as we move around the internet, if BuzzFeed.com and another site are both connected to, let's say, an analytics.com, on the first visit, this analytics.com can set an ID, such as DEF456, and then on the next site that I go to, say Forbes.com, analytics.com can tell that it's the same browser. Right, this is what's meant by third-party cookie tracking. It's simply I move from site to site, and because third-party websites such as analytics.com or tracking.com or google.com, because they can set their own cookies, they can see that it's the same browser. They can see the same browser moving from site to site to site. Right, so this is what's meant by third-party cookies. There's good things about them, and there's bad things about them. There's also some ugly things about them. The good thing about them is that they've enabled measurement beyond impressions and clicks. So one of the greatest things about third-party cookies is they've allowed marketers to assign value to attention, which means they can pay more per impression. If marketers only pay based on impressions, it's just going to be a quick race to the bottom. That economic system that we talked about earlier is very quickly not going to thrive simply because advertisers are just going to get the lowest possible quality of impressions. Publishers are going to stack every page with a whole bunch of ads. Doesn't work for end web users. So you don't end up with an economy that thrives. So one of the best things that third-party cookies have given us is a way for marketers to be able to value impressions on an individual basis, which allows them to pay more for them, which ultimately makes that ecosystem thrive. They also have some nice traits. They respect things like incognito mode in browsers. You can clear your history and you get everything forgotten because these IDs are just these abstract things like ABC123. They're pseudonymous. They're not very long-lived. They support things like do not track. And equally, they power some targeting, such as remarketing. If I am an e-commerce site and someone has abandoned their shopping cart and then they go onto someone else's site, using these third-party identifiers from DSP.com or whatever, I can show that person an ad, which allows me to make that attention more valuable to me. And because everything is about value of attention, is economic system that ultimately makes this economic system thrive. The bad thing about it, first and foremost, is they're not very long-lived. They're not nearly as long-lived as people think they are. So they're not a great measurement in terms of attention. We haven't been particularly transparent to web users. There's been a definite trust breakdown between ad tech companies and tech companies in general and end web users who were unaware that this mechanism was being used to monitor them as they moved around the internet. And ultimately, I'll talk about this more in a second, but all of the human behavior, unfortunately, has been kind of reduced to kind of lists of these cookie IDs, so segments which are shipped from one system to another. We'll get more into that in a second. The really ugly thing about these third-party cookies is that everybody has their own what they call identity space. So an exchange.com, for example, will be getting and setting its own IDs on Forbes.com and BuzzFeed.com. So it might call one browser ABC123. DSP.com will be doing exactly the same, but have its own identifier. And a DMP.com will be doing the same, but have its own identifier. And so somewhere you need to agree that this is the same browser, so that your ad tech systems, your ad exchanges, and your publisher sites and your DSPs can talk to each other and agree. on what the browser is. They need to maintain these horrible, what they call match tables all over the place, whereby we can say, okay, I call it ABC 123, you call it DEF 345. That's the same kind of browser there. So there's actually a lot of ugliness. There's far too much internet traffic, which is just about agreeing what these IDs are, and this is very, very fragile. However, with all that being said, these third-party cookies are crumbling. This mechanism, which we have used for 15 years now, to kind of track people as they move around the web and therefore value attention and then will make attention more valuable, is eroding. But this is not new. The first takeaway from today, if you already knew about cookies and ad-funded economic systems, the first takeaway is that this is already a problem. Third-party cookies, this mechanism of tracking people around the internet already today is impossible for about half of internet traffic. What this infographic here shows you, every box is a portion of internet traffic. So about 50% of internet traffic today is on Google Chrome, and close to about a quarter to a third of it has no third-party cookie coverage at all. This is because people have certain settings and ad blockers and various other things, and only a tiny fraction of it actually monitors people over a long period of time. So there's a tiny fraction up here, which is kind of very, very kind of trackable, if you like, but the vast majority quickly kind of erodes. If we look at Safari, which is the browser, and particularly Safari on iOS, which is, if you see my thing, it's these kind of iPhone devices, they've been kind of blocking what they call third-party cookies for a number of years now. They've had a program of work which generally gets referred to as Intelligent Tracking Prevention, or ITP, which has been stopping third-party cookies. So today on Safari, the vast majority of Apple devices, there is no third-party cookie coverage on. And there's other devices, things like Microsoft Edge and Firefox, which again, we're seeing an erosion of the cookie already. This is what the internet looks like today. So the challenge that we're to face in a couple of years' time, with Google making an announcement that they're going to stop third-party cookies as well, already exists today, because about half of internet traffic today is already completely unmeasurable using third-party cookies. So why are people panicking right now? Well, there's two reasons that people are panicking, and I think the second one is much more important than the first. The first reason that there's a lot of panic right now, and one of the reasons you might be on this webinar today, is because this mechanism of third-party cookies and all these different identity spaces and these different IDs being stitched together is really the glue that holds together kind of fragmented ad tech and martech systems. I don't particularly like this infographic from the guys at Luma, because it puts us in this weird little box that I don't think we fit in, the DMPs and data aggregators. But it does highlight the sheer number of different pieces of technology you need to be able to execute on the open web. So to get from publishers, ultimately, you have SSPs and ad networks and exchanges and DSPs, and then DMPs and data aggregators and data suppliers. Every time you make the hop from one of these systems to another, you have to agree identity spaces, which means you both have to have someone tagged with your third-party cookies, and then you need to agree. You call them ABC, I call them DEF. Right, so every one of these hops requires this to happen. And obviously, you can imagine with a lot of very increasingly short-lived cookies, that's very, very fragile, incredibly fragile. And with the kind of last vestige of measurement and third-party trackability being Chrome, with that going away, the very glue that holds together the fragmented ad tech Lumascape is eroding. So there is panic amongst the ad tech community because of all of this kind of going away. The second reason, I think, is actually way more important, and it comes back to this, the ad-funded content economic model. I think people often forget that all of this technology is purely in service of this economic model, allowing web users to have low-friction access to content, allowing publishers to create that content and pay for future content, and allow marketers to kind of reach and influence people. We often forget that. And everything that we do here has to be in service of making that economic system more efficient and more effective. Unfortunately, today, the biggest predictor of the value that a publisher will get for an individual impression is simply how old the cookie is, right? So if a publisher wants to work out how much it's going to get for an individual kind of ad slot on its page, the biggest thing that will tell it how much they're going to get for it is how old that cookie is. You can see this chart here. For every kind of dollar that a publisher will get for a cookie that's kind of four plus weeks old, they get about 32 cents on a new one. This traffic that is not measurable is less, you can't value that attention as well if you're an advertiser, therefore you pay less for it. There's less competition for it. This is an existential threat to publishers and people who are kind of creating great news and great content, because over recent years, they have seen a movement down this curve. So rather than being able to have, say, $1 CPM on average per impression, we're starting to see it get dragged more and more down. The week after the Google Chrome announcement saying they were also going to stop supporting third-party cookies, I was able to have meetings with all of the top publishers in New York, because more than anybody else in this entire ecosystem, this is who it hurts the most. These publishers who have already seen an erosion of their cost per impression, and they know that the biggest predictor is how old that cookie is. And if everything races to the same place, the same value that they get from Safari on iOS, your Apple traffic today, if it all ends up there, a lot of publishers simply will not be able to survive. If you overlay those two kind of graphics on top of each other, this is the internet. Most of it is dark. The dark stuff is not very valuable. Ultimately, the biggest predictor for what the entire internet will look like in 2 years' time with Google Chrome's changes is what Safari looks like today. If they're only getting kind of 35 cents on the dollar for the majority of their traffic, publishers have a couple of choices. They either create more ads, which ultimately will drive users away, or they radically cut their costs. Those are the only two real options, or we're starting to see publishers merge and kind of find cost synergies that way. Okay. So the big risk here is that attention is being commoditized, and therefore the cost per impression that publishers are getting is going down, and therefore that economic system that we talked about at the beginning is struggling. So what does a path forwards look like? If there's one single takeaway that I want you all to have today, it's that the future, rather than starting with how do you target in a cookieless world, it's all about measurement. Think about measurement. You can always optimize things that you can measure. And so you may be able to, if you could measure the effectiveness of your advertising, you can do a really good job with contextual placements and direct buys and things. But it always has to start with measurement. And when I think of measurement, I really think about it as marketers being able to assign value to attention. So not every impression can be of equal value. Otherwise, I think we just end up in a horrible situation. So how do you measure in a post-cookie world? Third-party cookies are already insufficient for measurement in the open web, simply because we do not have this mechanism across the majority of the open web today. Over 50% of it has no third-party cookie coverage. Advertisers are today already and often unknowingly shifting spend away from these devices, these Apple devices and places like Firefox, because they can't measure it. So if you're measuring your performance, what will happen, usually accidentally, is you will start shifting spend away from these devices simply because your CPA looks really bad, and things like this. You're also, advertisers are kind of fighting over this small fraction of the audience, this highly trackable. If you're using third-party data segments, by the time they've made it through all those hops of the Lumascape, you're only really dealing with the highly trackable portion of the internet. There's a hell of a lot of competition for that. The biggest predictor of you being in a data segment is not your actual activity and what you're really interested in, it's simply how old your cookie is. Over time, you get added to more and more segments. There's a lot of reasons for that. Incentives are all over the place when it comes to third-party data providers. But you can imagine a lot of people using the same data. Ultimately, it's a list of user IDs that are addressable. It's a tiny fraction of the internet. There's a lot of competition for that subset of the internet. My advice is use ITP, these devices, the intelligent tracking prevention, as in iOS Safari devices, the Apple devices, as the best predictor for how the whole internet will look in 2 years' time. If you can solve for that, or start beginning to solve for that today, you will be really well placed, regardless of the specifics of how the Chrome situation works out. When we start thinking about identity in the future, I think I might be about to run over time. When we start thinking about identity in the future and how do we work out that it is the same individual who's been on Forbes.com or NewYorkTimes.com and has seen this ad and then gone and bought something, there's broadly two ways of doing that. There's deterministic ways of doing it where we know for sure this is the same person. And we're starting to see an explosion in things like login walls and various other things. So we have an email address associated on both sides of it, and we say, yep, we're absolutely know for sure, and we expect that to grow. And there's a probabilistic approach, which is we're kind of 99% sure that this is the same person, and we're sure because the IP address on the device was the same, and it was around the same time. There's various other mechanisms you can use to be able to think probabilistically and actually start to measure this traffic. In other words, I think the deterministic is kind of, in the future, is down this highly trackable end. And ultimately, I think we need to make that a little bit bigger. And I think we'll see it get a little bit bigger over the coming years, particularly between across premium publishers, where they can have things like login walls. But then the probabilistic is what's needed to deal with the darkest parts of the internet today. When I say dark, I simply mean the untrackable, nothing to do with the actual content they're consuming. But we need something to shine a light on here, and that has to be informed guesses. So we need deterministic things we absolutely know for sure, making sure that we absolutely certain it's the same people, make that as big as possible. But to deal with areas, even today, where we have no way of doing that, but we absolutely know for sure, we have to make informed guesses. And I think that marketers are going to have to get a little bit more comfortable with probabilistic approaches to measurement. I think they should already be more confident with it today, because there is a lot of value in reaching people in these environments which are difficult to measure. The impressions are cheaper and audiences are kind of accessible in these environments. But because it's not measurable, people are struggling with that today. But there are probabilistic approaches you can take, which, as long as you apply statistics, are very robust. Unfortunately, we have the entirety of statistics at our disposal, exactly the same statistics which are allowing us to make decisions as to whether you have coronavirus antibodies or not. This is a probabilistic thing. We don't actually know for sure, but fortunately we've been working on this problem for centuries, and so we've already developed techniques. But it does require a little bit more rigor when it comes to assessing those numbers. So I went through a hell of a lot there because I was given 25 minutes, but hopefully you will appreciate that the important things are, never forget this is all about making an economic system work. Third-party cookies have been really useful to enable some efficiencies in that economic system, but the main one is about being able to value attention. Moving forwards, you can start today by working out how you are working out if your marketing activity is working on iOS, Safari devices, these Apple devices today. Done.
Thank you so much, Peter. There was a champion effort on the timing. I appreciate it.
I have a reputation for going over on time, so I had a stopwatch, and yeah, I think I just about did it.
Awesome. Well, we are going to move now and transition to the panel section of our session today. But if you do have some questions for Peter, he is going to be involved in this conversation, so please add them into the chat at the bottom, and we can address them at the end. So just before we kick off into our panel, I'll just reintroduce you to our amazing panelists. So Peter and I are joined here today by two of New Zealand's leaders in this space. We're very lucky. So first up, I'm delighted to introduce you to Alicia Delaney. Alicia is, as Jill mentioned earlier, managing partner at MBM, one of New Zealand's leading independent agencies. Alicia has more than 2 decades of experience in the industry, and prior to her time at NBN, she had a wealth of experience in marketing roles in the likes of Telecom New Zealand. So thanks for joining us, Alicia.
Welcome.
We're also joined by Fabian Go. Fabian is part of the executive team at Stuff in the role of product director. So as a senior product leader in the publishing space, Fabian is passionate about the intersection of media, data and technology. And he currently sits on the IAB New Zealand Board of Directors and is an Adobe Experience Cloud Customer Advisory Board member. A bit of a mouthful. Welcome, Fabian.
Thank you.
Cool. So I'm going to kick us off with some questions. And initially, Alicia, I'd love to start with you. I'm keen to hear how NBN have been investing time and effort into preparing for what Peter's just described as the gradual demise of the third-party cookie.
Yeah, so look, first of all, I want to really recognise that getting Peter's presentation, that was great, getting a really complex topic, which I think it's fair to say is being approached from a media point of view as the sky is falling in. and actually given some clarity. I think that was great. So look, what have we been doing? So when we think about third-party cookies and the role that they play, really there are three different roles that we see third-party cookies play. One, Peter mentioned quite clearly, is around measurement. It's really around how do we measure better. The other one is when you can measure, you can optimize. So enabling real-time optimization. And then the third is around that audience definition and segmentation. So what we've started to do is map out where those cookies are being used and how are we going to tackle measurement, for example, without that third-party ecosystem. How are we going to tackle audience segmentation? And is that still the right strategy going forward? How are we going to optimize if you're not getting the direct line of sight? So it's really beginning to think about what are the alternative tactics for each of those functions that we value right now. Will they exist in future? And if they don't exist, what is the evolution of the way that we approach digital marketing?
Nice. Awesome. I love that. And actually, I agree, Peter, the clarity I think that has provided today is really good. Fabian, what about stuff? How are you guys approaching this?
So thank you, Peter and Alicia. Just talking on the stuff spaces, I think I'll split it into three broad categories. Firstly, what it means in terms of our business own kind of approach to analytics and insight and intelligence, what it means for measurement overall, both for our business and the market, and then the third category of what does that mean for attribution and data exchanges at a market level. For our own business, at least, analytics or our own internal analytics have always been using first-party cookies for a long time now. So as a business, actually, one of our biggest challenges have always been reconciling between internal first-party data versus third-party measurement systems. But we're quite used to it now, so quite comfortable with that. For third-party systems, which basically are mainly there to serve market-level measurement, we look at that in terms of that's what our customers see, but we still always make our business decisions based on our own analytics, primarily because, first-party cookies, as Peter has described, has a range of benefits in terms of, less loss of kind of data, less duplication of data. It's just more persistent, and we can continuously validate what we see ourselves. So as far as that is concerned, nothing really changes from our perspective. We'll continue to use first-party cookies. And to Peter's point as well, if there's anything that keeps us up awake at night, it's more around ITP tracking protocols, because that is directed at all types of tracking. So certainly his advice around looking at that as the template for how browsers will operate in the next 1 or 2 years is probably a good idea. But there still remains issues for market measurement and for data sharing, right? So I'll go to measurement first. In April, we announced that we would be exiting Nielsen's measurement products. Now, there are a variety of reasons that we did that. But for the digital measurement part, at least, it certainly was because we felt that the technology challenges and landscapes will just continue to increase the divide between what's being observed to happen versus what's actually happening. And that just kind of really isn't healthy overall. But I think that the most important reason for us probably comes down to what our CEO has recently stated to the business, which is that fundamentally Stuff is a journalism company. And the biggest challenge for journalism around the world is restoring the public's trust in, our work and our role as the fourth estate. And we can't achieve that without making public trust the North Star for our business. So internally, we're now going through a process to discover what that means, what are all the drivers of customer trust, brand health, customer satisfaction, service levels, and the work that we do, so that we can measure ourselves and move in that direction. So that's all to say that going forward as a business, trust and engagement are probably the key performance indicators that Stuff will look to grow. And the work that we've got to do with the industry is how to communicate on how that translates into better partnership and commercial outcomes for them as well. Moving on to data and exchanges and third-party attributions and so on. The two big challenges that I see, firstly, is as a publisher having enough data in the first place that you've got a comparable product to social networks and search and so on. But the second is how do you enable data sharing and exchanges in a world where the intermediation layer that has been done using third-party cookies no longer exists. Or the first problem, we think that declared identities are the future, really, in terms of being able to serve our customers better, in terms of being able to know them better, and also in terms of being able to say to our advertising customers and give them a view of more accurate reach and attribution of their campaigns on our products. So I think that in the near future, and I can't tell you when exactly, but it's very likely that someone coming onto stuff will have to be logged in to use the product in the consumer content. The second problem is a bigger one. It's certainly an industry-wide problem, and it's certainly one that relies on, I think, some level of technology innovation and working with Apple and Google and other browser providers to try and resolve. It's one that, you know, I talk very closely with our technology partners in the industries in terms of what is the future? What is the future for a cookieless world? And how do we enable, you know, market level, industry level, or customer to business level sharing of data without the technology stack we currently have?
Mm-hmm. It's a really good question that you finished on there, Fabian. You mentioned partnerships being really important, and you're working really closely with your tech partners as well on this issue. From a publisher perspective, do you think that there is some more work that agencies and tech vendors, for example, could be doing to support publishers and marketers and brands with this transition?
Yeah, I definitely think there are. At a New Zealand level, at least, I think if the view is that we need to come together and figure out what an industry-wide solution is that the market and the customers will trust, that's really important. And personally, I haven't seen enough of that happening yet. We've had some conversations about it at the IAB level. I get a sense that sometimes it's a too hard basket, too far on problem. And, as we know with that COVID and with media as it is, there are a lot more challenges in front of us to resolve. But this problem's going to hit us, right? And to be frank, the first time I've ever got engaged in a, death of cookies discussion must have been 6 to 8 years ago. So it's still going on. Cookies are still around, actually. But I think that's going to come anyway, much sooner rather than later. And I think the point that Dr. Day raised around a lot of the reaction in the last, I think early kind of 3-4 years ago has been to circumvent effectively the browser mechanics. That really hasn't worked well for the industry. I think that just blew back on the industry overall, and it's made the browsers take a harsher stance on, we'll just lock everything down then if that's your approach. And I think the view that you've got to figure out actually what is the thing that, or what are the things that the customers really don't like, and if they don't like it, that's fine. We have to take that off the table and figure out how we get our outcomes. That might include giving something back to the customer. We really have to have a hard conversation about that. But I think if publishers, vendors, and agencies or advertisers all try to find their own solutions, firstly, it's very expensive. And secondly, it's very unlikely that we're going to achieve a solution without some sort of collaboration with the main browser providers anyway.
Definitely. And Alicia, from an agency perspective, so Fabian saying, yeah, there is more work that agencies and vendors can be doing. Do you have your own thoughts?
Look, I mean, I think we're in New Zealand, but lots of advertisers are global companies. And so we need to look at what's happening. This isn't a New Zealand issue. It's a global market challenge. What is the shape of the market going forward? I think when we think about New Zealand, we have the privacy law changes coming in I think November of this year. As an industry, we need to understand what the impact of that law change is and get much better about educating everyone in the value exchange around the role of customer data collection and transparency. I don't think in New Zealand in particular that we're very good at that. And I guess, yes, collaboration is important, but again, we're in New Zealand and we have to look to bigger markets, what is happening in the EU, what's happening in the US, particularly New York and California, as they are, I guess, at the front face of all of this change. And then you need to overlay, I guess, the New Zealand challenge, which is for us scale. And so as the cookies crumble, what we see is scale decline. And suddenly, it's a very real challenge in New Zealand that you start hitting, you don't have minimum thresholds. That's already started happening. For small niche audiences, we can't reach them anymore because you're not hitting the thresholds. So I think being really clear on what we're collecting, why we're collecting it, and how we're solving that with local publishers and having an eye on what's happening globally. But I don't think we're looking for a technology solution, unfortunately.
I love that global perspective. It's so true, and it definitely is a nuance of the New Zealand market. You mentioned the value exchange there, which I think is a really interesting topic, like just to dig into a little bit more. And Peter, we've previously spoken, and I know you've spoken a lot about the importance of that first party customer data strategy for brands and marketers. How likely do you think it is that consumers are going to be more willing and increasingly willing to share their data with those companies who are open and transparent about their collection and measurement practices?
I think it really depends on how it's done. So we've seen this globally. So when GDPR was announced, which is the regulation in Europe, which basically forced publishers and advertisers to get explicit consent. We worked with the IAB. The IAB in Europe and the IAB in the UK did a great job actually at pulling together publishers and advertisers. We were part of that conversation. And we with others kind of invented a mechanism for being able to distribute consent signals. So we were to collect things from end web users, say, yes, it's okay to use my data, and then pass that around so everyone can be compliant. Now, it's definitely not perfect, but it was a starting point. Now, if you're in Europe on a device today, one thing that we've learned is, if I'm completely honest with you, we launched something called Quantcast Choice, which is the free way that publishers and advertisers could go and collect that consent. But this is annoying pop-ups every time you're on your device. As you go from site to site, these really annoying pop-ups, and they're super annoying, right? We actually solved for two parts of the economic system, which was we solved for the advertisers and publishers collecting that consent. We forgot the web user, right? And so we suddenly became a consumer-facing company for the first time because we're the largest consent management platform out there. Our logo is on these all annoying pop-ups all over Europe. And we'd forgotten that really that's annoying. That's friction in terms of access to content. So our Twitter feed all of a sudden had Quantcast sucks because it was this interruptive experience. So I think we've certainly learned that having this kind of barrier between people and access to content is necessary to be compliant, but it needs to be done in a respectful way. And we've iterated on the design of that to make it less intrusive. And we believe we continue to invest millions and millions of dollars in this product line because we believe that ultimately, if there's transparency and control and ownership there, we think consumers are going to lean into that. Particularly with the high quality content. We don't think it's going to be true across the entire internet and all the rubbish, but for high quality content, for high quality journalism, having some sort of low friction login, say, which maybe you only need to log in once every 2 weeks across a whole suite of publishers. Maybe you can be forgotten whenever you want to be forgotten. Maybe it's very transparent about who has access to your data and you can quickly turn stuff off. We think if that mechanism exists, then we think that coupled with education, we think is likely to lead to a tranche of publishers in particular being able to establish that kind of first party trusted relationship with end web users. And if it's a pool of those publishers, we expect it to have reasonable reach and scale. So it's certainly, I mean, that's I'm not here to talk about Quantcast today, but that's certainly our roadmap, and we're testing a whole bunch of ideas in Europe and the US, and we're going to be launching all that stuff in APAC, including New Zealand, kind of early next year. But yeah, we think that absolutely, as I've heard from the other panelists, I think, developing a trusted relationship with the end web user, where the level of transparency and the level of control and the simple mechanisms to use is essential, really, for a sustainable internet.
So you mentioned that, I guess, the high quality content that, you do believe that consumers are going to be willing to pay for. Fabian, from a New Zealand publisher experience, do you think that is New Zealand the same as the global markets? I think Alicia made a really good point earlier about comparing ourselves to global and then taking our New Zealand nuances.
Same with the global market in terms of technology, or were you referring to content question specifically?
The content and the value exchange of paying for high value content.
I think scale is always an issue for New Zealand, and I think if there one thing that is quite common in New Zealand is the large news publishers, at least, cover the same amount of stories or types of stories in breaking news, and that is quite pervasive across the market. Most pay for content products here in New Zealand tend to be either really niche, or they there's only really one other player that has a paid subscription product right now of any scale at all. So I think that is going to be a challenge, payment specifically, but that's not necessarily the same challenge for call it a login wall, if you will. I think with the login wall, the bigger challenge, Justin, why are you asking me to do this? What we found during lockdown when Stuff Itself launched our contributors or donations program were quite a lot of public support for essentially our business and the journalism that we did. Some of the initial results showed us that if we had launched a paid subscription product as well, we would be basically earning the same amount of money for a lot less work. So it certainly changed our views in terms of how important it is to maintain that relationship with your customer and to communicate that with them and take them on a journey to support your business, not necessarily just content per se, but just your business and what role your business plays. And I think, we think actually that if we're able to do that, then we can solve some of this initial problems around knowing who our customers are, identifying them, and then figuring out how to serve them better. And again, you can comment along the wall if you want. But really, I think it's right now, it is difficult to increase the experience curve without actually, when trying to do it for a lot of anonymous users. It's much easier to do that once you know who they are and what they need. That does translate to commercial outcomes. That's later down the road, and I'm not saying that's not going to happen. And I think potentially, to Alicia's point, that's really where we can look at the New York Times, the Guardians, all of which are experiencing with various levels of their own login and registration programs. We can look at what they do and what methods they're setting and how they work with their partners. And, for the lack of a better word, copy those approaches. I don't think we need to reinvent those approaches over here. What we need to invent is how do we change the relationship between us as a customer and us as a content publisher and us as a journalism company with our customers. But that's on us to resolve, not really for the customer to resolve.
Yep, understood. Cool. And thinking about coming back to the measurement topic again, and thinking about all of the changes that we've heard about today, we know that measurement is going to drastically change, and that ability to measure and the capability to measure has definitely played a part in how we've gone about our performance marketing strategies. So this one I want to throw to everyone, and Alicia, we'll start with you, but what do you think the difference might be moving forward in strategy around marketing with the changes in measurement? What do you think a digital media plan of the future might look like?
Okay, so look, I think in that question, when we talk about measurement changing, we make the assumption that the measurement that we have right now in digital is good, and it's not, because we don't really know about, we don't have a good measure of post impression, for example, especially when cookies are not trackable. We know it does something, but we can't quantify how much. We allow in performance, digital performance media in particular, we allow credit kind of all over the place, and then we apply attribution models, which quite frankly, from an advertiser's point of view, is just rearranging the deck chairs. It's not giving them more conversion volume. And so the actual underlying digital measurement is broken. And of course, it doesn't take into account that people don't operate inside a single digital channel where they're not influenced by anything else. So I'll step away from talking about why digital measurement's broken and go, okay, so what does that mean? Well, we need to measure things more holistically. So what we can measure in digital is a really good point-in-time yardstick, or directionally gives us good direction on what may or may not be working. But it's not absolute, because there are a whole bunch of external factors that we don't see in any kind of measurement. So things like big bigger studies, longitudinal studies, MMM, for example, or market mix modelling, looking for causation, I guess picking up on Peter's presentation, deterministic, probabilistic, but you need data for that. But data, there is data and there is first-party data, and ultimately the data that matters is what is driving the business of the person that is investing in buying media or buying marketing outcomes. So if we can start to lay those out, then we have a better understanding of, over time, what is driving. What it takes away is the very immediate ability to do very small conversion happened, therefore I change an optimization strategy. But ultimately, there needs to be a bigger picture approach to how are we measuring, and recognising that digital performance is just one small part of an overall consumer conversion journey.
Yeah, good answer. Peter, what about thoughts? Can you add to that?
Yeah, I think, you know, I find it odd in the world of digital media that people think they're data driven, but they don't understand data. And what I mean by that is there's quotes from statisticians in other fields. The first one is, all models are wrong, but some of them are useful, right? The idea that you can reduce influencing large sets of human behaviors down to a single metric is just ludicrous, right? So measuring just purely on a CPA basis makes absolutely no sense at all. However, that and looking at everything else in cohort can be useful. So I find it odd that some marketers are obsessed with a CPA metric to the third decimal place, when I think the rational thing to do is to have a whole bunch of different models, and you just generally just move them directionally, right? So if all of your measures, lots of simple models are telling you that this tactic or this campaign or this partner is doing better than others, that's probably believable. If you suddenly got an outlier and my 30-day view through look back CPA looks really good, but all of the rest of them look really bad, you're probably optimizing towards the wrong thing, right? So I think there's been a little bit of a kind of rush to make everything data driven without understanding that all of these models are wrong. Some of them are useful. I personally prefer simple models because I can understand them. So as soon as anyone talks about multi-touch attribution and regression based on that, I'm like, no. I've got no idea where the flaws are in that. I know what's wrong with the click-through rate. So I'll use it and I'll monitor it. And if all of a sudden my click-through rate spikes up, it's telling me something, probably I've got fraud. But, you know, so I think measurement is essential. And I think it is broken today, but mainly because people's obsession with trying to reduce some complex thing down to a single metric. The second thing I'd say on measurement is Goodhart's law, which basically says as soon as a measure becomes a target, it ceases to become a useful measure. This was originally kind of about economic policy. I think this is very true here. So it's, for example, it was very sensible to want to know whether my ads have been viewed or not. But then setting an 80% goal for viewability across all of my activity means that the cost of an ad that is 80% likely to be viewed is 4 times the cost of one that's 60% likely to be viewed. That's completely irrational at that point. Then a really irrational behavior if you suddenly, you know, conflate measurement and what you're kind of targeting. So yeah, I have a lot of views on measurement. But I do think that there's an opportunity to have a conversation over the next couple of years, because measurement has to change anyway, to kind of take a step back and work out what cohort of measures could we use to get back to doing marketing again, rather than obsessing with reducing everything to a single metric and a pivot table.
How passionate you are about measurement, Peter. So Vivian, we only have a couple of minutes left. What are your thoughts? Do you want to add anything?
I completely agree with Alicia and Peter there. So, you know, I think I would summarize that as, for all its simplicity, the click has made many people very lazy. And effectively, I don't know, maybe over time, laziness leads to a lot of stupidity and irrational behavior. I don't think that was intended to be that way. There is, you know, obviously a saying that for all its sins, digital is the most, is a channel where you'd expect to get the most attribution, and measurement is the one that you trust the least, and that is certainly ironic. And I think that's not the technology doing that. That's a function of effectively how we've, or a consequence of effectively how we've all galvanized our thinking around the click is the king, whether the click leads to a CPA or a CPC. So marketing and customer journeys are definitely more multidimensional than that. And, you know, I think everything Alicia said there certainly speaks to kind of more ambitious and more holistic look on the customer journey. So yeah, very interested and definitely very keen on seeing marketers today and tomorrow onwards starting to change that conversation away to the whole experience and journey, at least the outcome, rather than going back to a spreadsheet with CPAs on one column and impressions on the other.
Awesome, thank you. And we've only got a minute left, but Peter, I have had an audience question that I would love to pose for you, which is, what would you say are the most commonly used probabilistic methods for tracking users? Isn't this akin to fingerprinting that's also being cracked down on by browsers? Peter, did that come through?
Hello?
Hi.
Sorry, you broke up there. I read the question though in the, oh no, it's still unstable. Right. So yeah, I personally think fingerprinting is a terrible thing to do. I think it's not, it doesn't build that trust end up with the end web user. There are approaches that you can take based purely on IP address and various other things, which don't require things like browser fingerprinting. I think that's just a race to the bottom. Some people are doing that. I just don't think it's sustainable. I think it's the wrong approach. I think the right approach to the mid-long term is absolutely just establish a trusted first-party relationship with the end web user. I think look to Europe with what they've done in consent there, and then look at the mechanisms of how that's evolving at the moment in terms of bringing transparency. A much smarter way to go longer term. When you take probabilistic approaches, you typically use things like the IP address and how someone's moving around the internet to join together a couple of different first-party cookie spaces. But as soon as you get into kind of fingerprinting and things, people are doing that, but I think those companies are a bit sketchy and I'd avoid them.
Great. Awesome. That is actually all that we have time for. So thank you again, Alicia, Peter and Fabian, for being here with me today, and thank you for the IAB for bringing the conversation together. I think before you guys go, we should have a poll live at the bottom of your screen somewhere where you can just tell us what you thought of today's contents. That would be amazing. And then if you did enjoy today, please do check out the, oh, there we go. Please do check out the IAB's upcoming webinars on the website. The Standards and Measurement Council are looking forward to continuing this conversation around the demise of the third-party cookie. I think we've had a great chat today. And our next session is going to be a deep dive on identity and Project Rearc. So we'll send more details of that to come. But thanks again, team, and have a lovely day, everyone.
See ya.
See you.